So last week I wasn't able to join you guys because I was in another time zone. So there's that. Yeah, sorry. But today we're gonna finish out this. It's kind of I've read so many commentaries at this section. A lot of people group it in with the last one. Some people don't, but it's only 2 verses. But it is an uncomfortable one I don't know if it's as uncomfortable as last week's, but it depends on how uncomfortable you were with last week's. This is why we're doing this outside. So you can run away. But I want to spend a little bit of time, and I've done so much study on this that I think I can actually, I have some quotes that I do want to read, but I think I can do this without that and keep it relatively to the point. But if you guys want to interact and ask more questions about this, is fine. But picking up at verse 31 of Matthew 5, right on the heels of him talking about adultery, he says, this is Jesus, he says, it has been said, nope, there we go. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. That's it. 2 verses. Isn't this lovely? So one of the things that I think is really important on the outset whenever we talk about this conversation is there's one specific thing that's multifaceted that Jesus is just specifically targeting at this point. Also, he recognizes, and I think I'm going to try to unpack this a little bit. This is also going to be an example of how to read the scriptures across the board and not just 2 verses. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I think this will help because I know I have friends, I have family that have undergone divorce. I know statistically, what's the stat now? I don't know. 51%. So Randy's my stat guy. Thank you, Randy.
Yeah. Did you look that up before this week or something? No, I just know.
He just knows it.
I have a lot of family. A lot of family.
Yes, we are fine. Unless you're Abigail.
Yeah. So advice number 1. No, I'm kidding. But that being said, like there's a lot of things. So what I want to do is start with what God's intention is first, okay, and then carry that into the context of this world, which we know there's not always a right and wrong. Sometimes there's a wrong and less wrong. Does that make sense? No? Yeah. Thank you, Randy. Okay, let's start with the ideal. Okay, what God's hope is, right? His hope is that when 2 people are married, when a husband and wife are married, they stay together. That's the hope. That's the hope. Okay? Now, let's take this now into the real world. Specifically, let's start in Jesus' day, because he specifically says, you've heard it said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So what is Jesus specifically targeting? What?
I can tell you what my mother's family feels.
No, well,
it's very wrong.
Yeah. See, I've read across the Christians, the church family, and you have some really hardline stances where under no circumstances you have, and then you have on the far side of, you know what? It's just a paper. Do what you want. Like there's churches on anywhere in between there. Okay. This is what I want to highlight though. Okay. Because what specifically Jesus is piggybacking on something that they've heard. Remember, like you've heard it said. And secondly, especially in, he talks about this subject again in Matthew 19 later on. I'm going to cut this short and not even read that. So you can go read that yourself if you want to. For full disclosure, I did not have it to say anyway. I just was going to reference it. So there you go. But what he's pulling from is Deuteronomy 20. Oh, I got to go down. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Nope. Apparently I didn't pull that.
24:1.
24:1. Thank you, Study Bible on the phone. Aaron. Aaron.
Just,
yeah, he knew that. Just like stat guy, he's my reference guy. So in Deuteronomy 24:1, Moses tells the Israelites that the English translations are not very fun to read. It says something like along the lines, if your wife displeases you, and some translations clarify that it's not just if you burn a meal, because there were some Jewish groups that thought that. But I highlight that because that's the kind of thing Jesus is specifically targeting. Okay? Are you following me with that?
You're not meant to.
Okay. You two are going to be my litmus test to make sure that's kind of coming out clear. Is that cool? Can you help me with that? You're getting bored? Burned? Blinded? Blinded by the lights. So, in Jesus' day, what was taken from Moses' words in Deuteronomy 24, right? Thank you. But this is going to be bad. Wasn't that Moses was, which Jesus talks about in Matthew 19, that Jesus is saying Moses was giving you guys grace or concession within the context of you guys being hard-headed. And so it actually was a protection for the woman to do this, to issue the certificate of divorce, because then it proved to others that she was not connected with another person. This is going to be great. But what people had latched onto was they read Moses' words this way: as long as I give a certificate, I can do this. Do you hear the difference? No? Yes, you guys love this conversation, don't you? So, why is marriage such a big deal to Jesus? Well, he later on, like in Matthew 19, he connects it to Genesis chapter 2 and 3. No, Genesis 1 and 2, sorry. He connects it there. But in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul talks about how on this earth, there's this image of the church and Jesus between the husband and wife, okay? And so I want to highlight that connection about this is such a big deal to Jesus. And that's why he wants to talk and not just, wow, I just broke my case. Treat this haphazardly, okay? Now, that being said, I'm just angry. I'm angry at everything right now. Just kidding. There's an ant. Here's my advice for you two. I'm looking at you. I'm going to wait for it. There, I got it. Did I make you uncomfortable by staring?
No.
How about if all of us do?
I'm telling Mom that it sounds like kids are being brutally stabbed.
Oh, no, they're not. They're still moving. So here's my advice for this, because the first thing I think Jesus is highlighting is this is so much more important than what the world says. I think this is the first thing Jesus is highlighting. So I'm going to share my approach to this. It worked for me. Okay. And then I'll be done with you two and you can go off. You're ready. She's like, ready. My advice, based upon studying the Bible and also practical living and being hurt and seeing hurt, is I would not recommend dating somebody that you could not possibly see being married to. That's an I, not the Lord. But I think that if this is such a big deal to God, and there's so much advice and warnings given throughout the New Testament, throughout the church history, about being careful who you enter a relationship with. I don't back down from that stance. I'm not a fan, although I have friends that are big fans of this. I'm not a fan of casual dating. I'm just not. Does that mean I hate people that do that? No, not at all. I just think that there's a lot at risk. And so why play with fire kind of thing. There you go. That's my advice. Got it? Good. Now you're scared. No. Oh my gosh. Okay. So anyway, let's go back to this. Now, what happens if that's God? See, I'm trying to speed this up, so I'm sorry this might seem a little disjointed. If that's God's intention, that when two people are married, they are together. And then Moses, though, highlights the fact that we don't live in a perfect world. People make mistakes. And it seems like even Jesus is saying in Matthew 5 that there is grounds for some. There is grounds for some divorce. Now, this is where I think reading the whole Bible and actually studying it shows the importance of it, okay? In the text in Matthew 5, it seems like there's only one case that Jesus says. That's what he says, okay? However, I'm going to speed this up. I hesitate to explain this way, not that anybody here would do this, but I know anybody that might watch this later, or I know that anybody that reads this will probably think, oh, you're saying that I can find a reason, and I think then you're approaching this for the wrong thing. You really are, okay? But in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul, knowing the words of Jesus, knowing what Jesus said, being a teacher of what Jesus said, Paul then comes back and he says, here's another grounds that a divorce would be permissible. Okay? Does that make sense? I keep looking at you and I said I was done. I'm sorry, Piper. All right. So I want to highlight that for a second, because I think this includes, or this beckons us to read discerningly, not just read a text and say, well, the Bible says what it says and that's what it is. Yes, it does say what it says. However, it's also given to a people, the church, to learn from and be discipled by. And then you have the Apostle Paul who encounters Jesus. He was destroying the church according to Luke's words in Acts, and yet he encounters Jesus. He falls off his horse or his donkey or whatever it was, and he's blinded, and he comes and he completely flips over and he goes and he now promotes Jesus and teaches Jesus and follows Jesus. And then here he is in 1 Corinthians 7 that says, okay, I know what Jesus said, that it's only in this ground, but I'm going to add this. I'm going to say this is also grounds. So it tells me a little bit that maybe there's more that meets the eye of what a specific text is alluding to. And what Jesus's main point is, this is a last resort. So much like I think the culture today has drifted much the same way that some of the Jewish culture did in that day. There was, I really wish I had highlighted this quote, because I'm skipping all over the place. But it was not very difficult for people, because again, all I had to do is I just got to write a certificate that says I release, like the guy named Josephus actually includes in one of his books, in his autobiography, he writes and he says, this is how I divorced my wife. And he included a thing. It was pretty easy. It says, I now release you from this, and you now release me of this, and this is the date, and we're done. That was it. Pretty easy. And I think that hurts. That hurts not just God, but that hurts people. So I think keeping in mind what Jesus is saying, learning from the example of Paul, and now we're going to go back a little bit to the Old Testament again, because I think that helps us complete this circle. And then I'm going to summarize whatever the weird words I just said were, so that way you guys can walk away with this a little bit of encouragement, I hope. Okay. I don't think this is a mystery. I really like studying from scholar Scott McKnight. I really appreciate his work. And so he says, if the marriage covenant between a man and a woman is representative of the covenant of Jesus in the church, then there are three things that must be present for the covenant to continue. Number one is this, presence. So being with, just as God's covenant with us is his presence. He is with us. That's number one. Number two, advocacy, being for us. Hold on, buddy. Oh, you found a stick. Of course you did. And the third one is this. The third aspect of the covenant is this, being for us unto a final result. In the case of the church, into Christiformity or becoming more like Jesus. Does that make sense? So in the covenant between God or Jesus and the church, he's with us, he's for us, and he's for us into an ultimate purpose. If marriage is meant to be and created to be a representation of that, then those three things also must be involved in that. To where a spouse must be with, must be for, and must be for to an ultimate purpose. Does that make sense so far? They think it makes sense. He loves this. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. That's what happens when you don't take the words of Jesus seriously. Dogs attack you. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So I think those three aspects of covenant are crucial. And this is the last bit of the Old Testament that I'm going to bring in. In Exodus, you don't have this, and I don't think you do either. If you do, this would be awesome. I know the chapter. What chapter am I thinking of?
7.
13.
That was eerily close to each other. Wrong. But eerily close. Yeah, 7. Yeah, why not? Exodus 21. I think around verse 10, and it's a weird text. It's a really weird text because in this day, the Israelites have been brought out of Egypt, and so it's important. Another tidbit for studying the Bible: it's important to understand what people know when things are written to them. I'm sorry. You can connect that again if you want, or just hold on to it. Nope. I don't know what to think about this. And this is even on
Very
film.
good.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like we need to address this.
When it flies away, Aaron's gonna be.
No, we're good. No flying away. Period. Just no. So the Israelites are brought out of Egypt. All they know is Egyptian culture. Okay. All they know is Egyptian culture, and so what they know, they do not know what comes to be the ways of God. They do not know this at the time, and so the words that they give is when two are married. If this is why I can say this, because this would not be good advice. Period. In today's. But Moses is sharing, and God says, if you're married and you take on another wife, we don't do that, okay? Just for the record. But he says, in what you know and where you're at, we're going to fix this later. But for now, this is something you need to know. He says, if you do this, here are things you cannot neglect your spouse. And he lists 3 things. He says food, shelter. I might list 4 things, actually. Food, shelter, marital relations, and something else. Maybe it's 3 or 4. Anyway, all of those to say, it's interesting to me that apparently that was important enough that God's talking to these people in the midst of your difficulties, or in the midst of wherever messed up you are, because they were messed up. Okay, these are important things that are part of the marital covenant. Okay, which go into the presence, advocacy, and formation. So that being said, let me take this, what Paul said, and what Jesus says here in Matthew 5 and in Matthew 19. I think that while this is never what God wants, I think there is this grace that he does extend when the covenant breaks down. When a spouse is no longer for, when their spouse is no longer with, and when their spouse is no longer for them or with them to the purpose of pursuing Jesus or pursuing the kingdom or anything like that, unto a point. It's when, if those 3 things or something along those are not there, or they're no longer providing, or they're no longer in, like, that covenant is being broken already. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give you a holistic picture, because what we see is the ideal. If it was ideal, if we didn't have sin, if we didn't have all that, there would be no divorce. But we live in a world where sin runs rampant. We live in a world where I'm not fully formed. Aaron for sure isn't fully formed. And we don't have like all these other, just other things. And so because of that, there's a lot of things that we will not get the ideal yet. Does that make sense? So all that to say, we have the ideal. Does it always live out? And what I was saying at the beginning, which I think you asked me, what did you say? Was we like to think in the ideal, you have a choice between right and wrong. But I have myself been in situations in this world where there was not a choice between right and wrong, but a choice between wrong and less wrong. Which one do you pick then? You don't have to answer that. There's an existential crisis right now, and that's a big word. I'm sorry. Never mind. All that to say, are you coming to join me? Thanks, buddy. So, this is what I want to leave you with. And this is, I found this quote, so I do want to share this with you. I think this will summarize this for you. I already summarized most of this, but this is the quote from some of the scholars that I've been researching from. He's saying, this is my interpretation, is what the scholar says. He says, I believe we can learn from Paul adding another exception to permissible divorce while being fully aware of Jesus' teachings. We can learn from this what constitute love and marriage, as well as what constitutes grounds for divorce. And let me rephrase that in my own categories. If covenant love is a commitment to be with someone and for someone as someone who is working unto divine ends, then marriages are destroyed when one partner refuses to be with the spouse, or who becomes someone who is against that spouse. When a man obviously fails to be the husband that covenant love demands, or a wife obviously fails to be the wife that covenant love demands, grounds for divorce may, catch that underline, may be present because the covenant is being destroyed. I thought that was really clearly put. But I think I'm going to adopt what John Stott did. Do you guys know who John Stott is? He's an old British guy. That's all you need to know. Actually, he's really smart. But this is what he says. He says, when somebody asks me to speak with me about a divorce that they're planning on doing, he says, I have now for some years steadfastly refused to do so. I have a rule never to speak with anybody about divorce until I have first spoken with him or her about two other subjects, namely marriage and reconciliation. So I think the biggest thing that I think the biggest takeaway for what we're talking about here, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, is this is so much bigger than maybe what the culture has been discipling us to realize. This is a bigger deal. At the same time, it is not where, if you're, heaven forbid, you're in a situation where your life is being completely destroyed, and no matter what your efforts to reconcile or to address or whatever else, that God's hope and desire does not lock you in to have to endure that for the rest of your life. That's also my take on that. I don't think that the divorce was never listed as the unforgivable sin. For that record, did you have a question, Becca?
No, I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
May I add, when your children are being tortured, divorce is acceptable.
Yeah. Again, I would put that in when you're not 4. Yeah. So that's a good point.
I mean, kids see things. And...
Yeah. So anyway, that's my summary. I had it better worded, written out, but I decided to do the best I could to summarize that. So hopefully that's something. Maybe I'll go back and re-record this in a different way. And you can watch the real thing later. Yeah, thank you, Becca. I appreciate it.
Where's the flashlight? There's a fly on my leg.
Asher, can you come here?
There it is again.
Random thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, practical though. So anyway, that being said, huh?
So I didn't say he was wrong.
Yeah, he has practical insights. I find it interesting. I think it's interesting that Jesus takes time, of all the things he could talk about when he's gathering his disciples on the mountainside and teaching them. I find it very interesting that this makes the list. I don't have much more to add to that. It just makes, and it's. I wonder if it's a little bit, if he takes time to teach about important things because of whom they might encounter later on. Because I don't think many of them. I think maybe Peter might have been married by that time, but I don't know about the rest of them. And I could be wrong on that too. But anyway, cool. Let me pray, and then I'm done. So I'm sorry, guys. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you that your grace is sufficient, even in our weaknesses. God, I know I can speak for myself that I have weaknesses sometimes, that whenever I see your grace, I use it as a way out. And I pray, God, that we would be ambassadors of your kingdom, that would disciple people in this world out of the kingdoms of this world and into your kingdom, so that they would not look for or mistake your grace as just an excuse to do what they want. May we hold the tension of grace and truth. May we hold the tension of reconciliation and accountability. May we hold the tension of good days and bad days. And Father, I pray that the relationships that we have, whether they're marital relationships or whether they're friendships, that they would highlight the goodness of you, because you are the giver of all good things. You're the triune God who has relationship in and of himself and created us in your image to also be in relationship. And so, Father, I pray that we live that truth out, and may it be bright, and may it be inviting and warm and comforting and healing to the people in our lives that don't know you. And so, God, we thank you so much for Jesus. We thank you that sin and death do not have the final word, but the fact that our King came, he died, he rose again, and he's alive today. And it's in his name that I pray all these things. Amen.